Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to have you here this morning. After a snow here in Quebec, I almost died, but I'm alive. I'm here this morning with Professor Roselina Angel. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thank you. It's an honor to have you this morning.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for inviting me. It's a pleasure for me.
Yes, we for me it's really an honor to have you here specifically because we know that you are far away from home. You are in South Africa. This is why our time today is not in the afternoon, but is in the morning. What you're doing in Africa? So far.
It's a story of the times. It depends where the pandemic caught us in. I was in the middle of a research project at the University of Pretoria, and all my flights kept getting canceled until they closed everything in South Africa. So I actually, it has been a nice event for me because I'm in a beautiful setting. I'm in a farm, and I can go out and have walks. So it's and I'm getting a lot of work done that I've been delaying, like writing papers and getting everything organized. So actually it's worked out, and I'm alive and healthy, and my family as well. So I cannot complain.
Yes, just gratitude, right? This is the way to take this time and all the time. So this morning we invite all these people that stay there around listening us. They sent a lot of questions. Thank you, people, for sending this. This helps us to fit these conversations. But I remind that this is basically a conversation. Like it's not really a presentation, so we don't go through so far. But I start saying, Roselina, my background, it's always in pathology, and I work with nutrition and gut health because it's impossible to separate the two things. And since I joined JEFO, I start to look more close to enzymes. That was not my background before. And I will do a very simple questions to you that sometimes I do to myself. Do you believe in enzyme? Do you believe that enzyme really help us to reduce the diet and have really more cost benefits in that?
I believe very strongly in it. I think if we go a little bit into philosophy, I'm a firm believer in that we can produce poultry and animals at moderately low output of excreted nutrients, that enzymes are a key part of that equation. And so I got into nutrition in part because I come from Colombia. I was seeing a lot of byproducts being disposed of incorrectly, thrown away, creating environmental negative impacts. And my whole idea was, how can we use all of these byproducts that are being wasted and use them in animal agriculture? And as I joined the University of Maryland, I got more and more into the environmental impact of animal production. And I think I would not be working in the area that I've been working if I didn't believe profoundly that we actually can produce animals in a very environmentally friendly way. And for me, I look at all kinds of tools. One of the primary tools that I believe allows us to do this are enzymes, exogenous enzymes. So making it short, Elizabeth, yes, I do believe that enzymes work.
I didn't think that you answered different, but I used to ask these questions just because in all this my conversation every week, I like to bring the scenario that you bring right now. Like for me to be in the industry, in the animal industry, to produce animals, will be always something that I, as a professional, I think, how can I improve these productions to be like reduce the impact, the environmental impact, increase the well-being of animals, right? These three conversations, I'm not sure that you follow, probably not. You are in Africa, I know. But we start this conversation with Dr. Kogut when we talk about the inflammations that could happens in the intestine because the excess of feed, like when you have excess of crude protein or excess of undigested feed, that in some way make an inflammation process, and could be a cost for the animal as a metabolic cost. And the second, it was with Sergio Vieira. We talk in Spanish, but basically we bring the same subject, like how can we improve the cost benefits of animal productions. In these days, I think, Roselina, that when you stop to travel, however, I love it, and I'm really sick about to come back to travel and to see my friends around the world. But I think that we saw, and this is scientific, that all these reductions in the way we move reduce the impact, the environment impact. So I'm wondering if it was really the agro industry that makes all this noise that people talk so much about. Oh, the agro is the one that is really impacted the environment. So now the agro is the only activity that still is going on because we need to eat. We stop to fly. We stop a lot of another aspects, and we saw a reductions in the environment impact, and we still are producing as before. So this is.
Yeah, I think what is happening right now brings to the forefront the fact that most of the information that we see, Elizabeth, is biased by where you are coming from. So this morning I was reading a report on the Chesapeake Bay and the environmental health of the Chesapeake Bay is a huge political hot potato, like they call it in the US. And I was reading a report that was extremely critical of the poultry broiler industry. And as I go through the data that they show, the way they are showing the data favors their position. And their choice of data favors their position. And I think we never manage to be completely unbiased. We are all biased one way or the other. But as scientists, it is our role in reality to try and be as unbiased as possible. So as I read the literature today and I look at some reviews, I see reviews that have an agenda. They are wanting to show that this works, or these are the things that should be looked at, and they select the literature that they want to put in rather than bringing in the pluses and minuses, the argument in favor and the argument opposed, regardless of where you are sitting. And I think I try and at least do it because I consider myself an advocate of agriculture. I believe we need to feed the world. I come from a country, as you know, that where a large part of the population still is living at very marginal levels and not knowing where their next meal is coming from. So I believe in food safety from the standpoint of keeping people fed correctly. But on the other hand, I also believe in animal welfare. I believe in environmental issues. And I also believe very strongly that we have to produce whatever we produce at the lowest cost. So that's where I sit, which is a bit on the fence, because I believe in all sides. I also believe that we can achieve a happy medium. It's not going to be a perfect medium, but we can achieve it. And I try and be as unbiased in my approach as I can be.
Roselina, I was wondering, from my first questions that I say, do you believe in enzyme? Because we have already some conversations about the subject, how difficult it's like you translate these benefits of enzyme that we saw in field because we reduced the diet, but to prove in experimental conditions the benefits of enzyme. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about this difference. How can we really measure the benefits of enzyme in the diet when you think about experimental and also compare with the field situation? Because I know that you have both sides. You have been in the field, you have been in academy many times. So how do you think that we can solve some issues that we can have in this area?
So I think it depends on the enzyme, and I think we've discussed this a little bit. I think with phytases, which is where I've spent a lot of my time, it is easier to see an impact in research as well as an economic and field impact that is positive, because the effect of phytases is large. So I add a phytase to a diet, and I can increase the digestibility of phosphorus or the availability of that phosphorus by 40 to 60%, depending on where I started in a corn soy diet, for example. And that is a measurable effect in a research study. My negative controls in general, if they are done correctly, work very well. And in the field, you are, through the application of phytases, you're reducing in general the amount of inorganic phosphates that you're buying. And as one looks now and towards the future, the cost of phosphates will tend to keep on going up because it's not a renewable resource. And it has a lot of competition for its use. So it's a much easier balance with phytase. If I go to an enzyme, for example, proteases, it's a much more difficult balance, because if I'm doing a research study with all of the scientific rigor required, I need a negative control that actually works. And having a negative control that works in a protease study is an elusive dream for a lot of us. So, and in part it is because you have a smaller impact and a more diffused impact. A protease doesn't act only on phosphorus, for example. In the case of phytases, we're talking about some amino acid release because of chelation reductions and less mucus being produced. But the primary impact is calcium and phosphorus. In the case of proteases, you have 20 plus amino acids that are being released in different proportions. And it is not a humongous release in terms of percentage change. So when you put a negative control together based on a matrix of released amino acids, you a lot of the time cannot see a performance difference. And that is very concerning for people that are purists, both in the field as well as from a research standpoint. I would say I would be the first person that says if you don't have a negative control, you have no idea what's happening. But having sat in a feed company, I know, for example, that I may have a diet that I am formulating that is giving me good results, both on growth and feed conversion and cost of the product that I am selling, which is the animal at the end, or the meat, or eggs. And if I say, okay, I need to reduce the amount of protein or amino acids that reach the lower tract for intestinal health purposes, I need to reduce the amount of nitrogen that is being excreted for environmental purposes. It may reduce the cost of my diet to be able to reduce protein overall and amino acids in my diet. So I can sit and formulate the diet based on a matrix for a protease that would reduce the amount of protein that I need in my diet. Overall, it's reducing the amino acids that I have in that diet because they're coming in from the protease, from higher digestibility of those amino acids. And if that diet with the protease actually gives me equal or better performance in the field, but it's costing me less, then as a commercial company, that is my measure with additives that give me a small increment in improvement, but are potentially giving me other improvements in terms of intestinal health, especially when I'm dealing with diets that I can no longer use antibiotics for. So I think you have to be somewhat a little bit mobile in your approach, understanding the magnitude of the effect that you are going to see. Can I really have a negative control? And I will say, having said, for example, that if with phytases a negative control usually works, I have seen a lot of field trials run by companies where their negative control does not work, even with phytases. So I think you need to understand how your feed additive, in this case an enzyme, is working, how much of an improvement you may have, and what is your ability to measure that improvement in terms of performance or better intestinal health. And those are the things that have to guide you in your decision making. But ultimately, the decision is going to be, do I get better performance or equal performance for a lower cost diet?
But do you believe that the lack of results that we got from these trials is because of negative control? You know, it's unbelievable the way that when I talk to people that are doing trials that they don't have a negative control. This is something like we have at my diet, and I want to see if I can just put in my diet, reduce it if the enzyme works or not, but you don't know how much is exactly your diet. And also, I think many nutritionists still work with a lot of margin, right, Roselina? So even if they reduce, they still are up what the animal needs. So even you cannot see difference in performance if you don't have really a negative control that really show a reducing in performance. I think this is what you mean, right?
Correct. So again, going to the EC enzyme, which is phytase for negative control, in most cases, people are overfeeding almost by 100%. So if I say my requirement in a withdrawal phase for available phosphorus may be 0.2, people are 0.35, 0.38. So they're almost double the requirement. and you use the matrix for a phytase, and it's never going to be that much. So your negative control doesn't work unless you have been very, very deficient at the beginning. And so these are the margins that we're talking about. And in the case of amino acids, I think the margins may not be as big, but they are highly variable and they're influenced by a lot of factors. What ideal amino acid ratio have you chosen to use? Is it the correct one? Is there a correct ideal amino acid ratio to use? I believe that there is a correct one out there. Whether we have it or not, I'm not going to get into that discussion because I think we haven't gotten there. The concept of ideal ratios is good, but they keep changing on us as we learn more things, and that tells me that we have not reached the point of saying that we know what we're doing exactly. The level of amino acids in ingredients, for example, we're relying on near infrared most of the time. It works. It's better than what we had before, which was a crude protein analysis of our ingredients, assuming that if we knew crude protein, we could predict our amino acid levels. So we have made a huge stride forward. But when I start looking at the data on amino acids from the big amino acid companies, that they keep, they do a lot of work on ingredient amino acids. And I try and understand the relationship between crude protein and a specific amino acid in data sets that may have 20,000 numbers. You have a lot of outliers in there. And you say, okay, what's going on? And this is what I'm relying on to formulate my diets. When I apply a matrix of amino acids to a diet, so I formulate my diet and I say, okay, these are my ingredients and these are my amino acids. Now let me put in my matrix based on the ingredients that I have for this protease, for example. The level of those ingredients changes. Potentially the level of synthetic amino acids as a proportion of total amino acids goes up, but I expect that protease to work as I predicted it to work in the original diet, which is not the diet I'm putting it on. So there are a lot of intricacies associated with the amino acid matrices for proteases that make it harder to apply in a consistent basis. Ultimately, for me, when I work with industry, I sit and I say, okay, let's look at field data. Am I getting better over a year? Am I getting better response, better feed conversion, less mortality, less morbidity for a lower price of a diet because I am using a protease, and then it's working for me. Now, the proteases will be more exciting to use when our protein ingredients are more expensive, for example. Today, we are living through some new times that I always think that when we are challenged, it's more exciting because you have to get away from this.
Out of the box.
Yeah, all the paradigms that you thought were you start getting a narrow field view when things are going well and you don't have a lot of challenges. This really makes you rethink everything you knew and try and defend your position and look at other options. And I ultimately believe that as we move more and more worldwide into antibiotic-free diets, issues related to protein digestibility and limiting the amount of peptides and partial pieces, large pieces of proteins that are getting into the lower ileum, ceca, and colon that becomes really important in the health of the animal and productivity. And so even though we may have low soybean meal prices that we haven't seen for a long time, we may still have a need for reducing protein levels. And one of our tools there are proteases.
So do you believe that we already have the nutrients requirements? Because last week I talked to Sergio and he said to me, why people are not using the technology in field? And I say, and Sergio say, oh, they because of academy doesn't have enough information. We need to redo the validation of requirements because we take out the AGP and these kind of things. And he said, no, that we already have all the information in the academy and people should start to believe and start to apply more in field. You are in the same page than Sergio. You believe that we are done our homework at the university and we need to just have more people in field start to apply this.
Right.
In the case of a protease, Remy.
So going back to the beginning of your question there, I think we really do not know exactly what the requirements are in a completely controlled environment. We have a better understanding for some nutrients than others, but I believe things keep changing. So again, let me get a little bit into philosophy, Elizabeth. If I believed I knew everything, I would not be working anymore. It would be too boring. For me, it's a discovery every day. You know, I thought I knew quite a bit about phytases until I found that industry was not applying it. They were seeing problems in the application. And more, it convinces me that research people in academia need to be working hand in hand with industry, with integrators, because what I see under very controlled conditions may not necessarily be what an integrator is seeing. And I need, as a researcher, to understand why that is occurring. In the case of phytases, for me, it was calcium. I knew what people were formulating in general, but I actually was surprised immensely and continue to be surprised by the level of calcium that the birds see that is not the same that the nutritionist is formulating. So it's a stepwise process of understanding what our limitations and challenges are to put what we have in research into application in the different companies, in the different regions with different ingredients. So I think we have a lot of knowledge that sometimes industry does not apply. And part of it is that I don't know, I don't want to get into a lot of details, but maybe 9 years ago, I was sitting in my office looking at agrostat phosphorus usage in broiler diets. And ever since I joined the University of Maryland, I've kept a table, an Excel, how much phosphorus is being used by industry on the average. And this value was not changing, Elizabeth. In fact, it was going up. And I thought, my God, I've wasted 12 years of my life because I think I've shown them and everybody, there's a lot of work, a huge body of work. That we can lower these levels, that we can use phytase more efficaciously. And that's when I started going out and actually talking more to industry, getting more involved. And part of the issue was, well, we apply what you're telling us, but we see problems. Well, why don't you come back to me and tell me? I have no problem with you telling me you're giving me shit out here. You know, what you're telling me is not good. Well, let's see, because I'm telling you things that I know work. I I do not come out with information unless it's worked repeatedly under different conditions in my research setting. But now I'm getting more involved. Why is it not working under field conditions the way it works for me? And it has been a wealth of new information and actually understanding better how we can work together as scientists in academia and scientists and nutritionists in the field in commercial companies to try and apply things correctly.
I will back to you in these discussions a little bit later, but I will not forget about one question that I have, that it's about these situations that we define, for example, for phytase, we define a dosage. You know, this is the dosage of phytase that probably you work on a lot. And then why in the field, Roselina, they put a double dose of phytase? How do you feel about that? How is your opinion about that? Because people say, oh, put double dose of phytase, but why we have, are the companies wrong in the dosage that we need to double it? How is your opinion about it?
So I think one has to understand a little bit about how phytases came into the market and for what purpose. So phytases came into the market as an enzyme that would liberate phosphorus or make phosphorus more available from a phytic acid molecule. So it was a way of increasing the digestible phosphorus or available phosphorus in a diet without having to add more inorganic phosphorus and allowing you to remove inorganic phosphorus. So the philosophy was phosphorus, phosphorus, phosphorus. And the companies came up with a dose that gave you the best cost benefit for phosphorus release. Because phytases in general will, as you increase the dose, it's a curvilinear response. It starts to flatten, you have to add more phytase to get a little bit more of phosphorus. And that is the concept of a phosphorus response for phytases. What we have understood more in the last 10 to 12 years, I would say, are all of the potential negative effects that phytic acid has. We knew them a long time ago. If you go back in the literature, 1920s, 1940s, all of these things were starting to be documented and really well. In the 1970s, there was a wealth of really, really good research. But we just didn't take it to heart. The other consequences of phytic acid or phytate in the intestinal tract. And what we found was that if you increase the level of phytase from that optimal cost benefit for phosphorus to thinking about the destruction of this molecule, we are no longer, we are not only thinking about phosphorus release, but we want to make sure that there is no phytic acid getting into the duodenum, into the small intestine. To do that, we have to help that phytase. We have to have a lot more phytases. If you think about it as mass balance, if I have more phytases, they can attack more phytic acid molecules and remove phosphates from them. And that doesn't guarantee, because I don't believe in a phytate-free world. We are not there. And I don't think we will ever be there, because in order for a diet to be phytate-free, at the point of ingestion, it can't have any phytic acid. And it will have the phytic acid. So we are looking at, for me, I don't want any phytic acid molecules reaching the small intestine, because if they do, they will tend to be chelated to a calcium other things also, but to a calcium for sure. And that calcium and phytic acid molecule at higher pHs that you encounter in the small intestine will form bridges and tie up acid residues in proteins and amino acids that are acidic. And that protein is lost completely. And it tends to be soluble proteins that would normally be digested really well. But once you have that phytic acid calcium protein chelate in the small intestine, almost nothing works on it. So my challenge nowadays is, how do I make sure that I have as little IP6, inositol 6-phosphate, which is a phytic acid molecule, getting to a duodenum? Because I go from a pH of about 3.5 in the gizzard almost instantly in the upper loop of the duodenal loop, and in the upper part, just as it's coming out of the gizzard, it goes to a pH of 5.
Yes.
And everything changes because these are chemical interactions that are related to how that molecule is charged. So the answer for you is that it's not how you think. Oh, if one is good, let me double it, like you see in a lot of countries with pesticides. Oh, this really works well, so let me put more in there. That is bad. In the case of phytase, what we're trying to do is achieve something very specific. And I will say this, with the older phytases, Elizabeth, I had done a lot of high dose work, and I had never seen a cost-benefit impact. With the newer phytases that tend to be quicker, we are seeing that at higher doses, we are getting what I call I don't like super dosing or double dosing or any of that. I want an extra phosphoric effect. So it's an effect that I can't explain with phosphorus.
But it's not that we need to review the dosage, because for me, like if you have something that all the time you need to put up, that something should be reviewed, right?
Well, that dose for phosphorus, I don't think has changed for most of these companies. And I still work with companies that do not want to use higher levels of phytase. They believe firmly that what they want the phytase to do is liberate phosphorus. So my normal dose, norma dose, which is the dose that was initially given by these companies for phosphorus release, is still valid for phosphorus release. As you increase the dose, Elizabeth, in most cases, you liberate a little bit more phosphorus, but not a lot more. So it's not a linear response. It is a curvilinear response. And you have to decide as a company, a commercial company, do I want extra phosphoric effects, or do I just want phosphorus as the impact of that phytase?
And how can a new nutritionist respond to that? How can he think how to decide?
That's an interesting question, because you will see companies that are very willing to go to high doses of phytases, and you have companies that really do not want to use the high doses. And what their philosophy is, I think, is cost benefit. And this is where it becomes a little bit difficult with enzymes commercially to demonstrate that extra phosphoric effect. So at least from research that I have done, either in my research facilities or with collaborators in other facilities, I would say that 95% of the cases where we use high doses of the new generation phytases, we will see a a significant improvement in feed conversion ratio. And for me, that is pretty good. That means I'm using less nutrients to produce the same amount of final product. Why people are not doing it is because they cannot see it in the field on a repeated basis. So it goes to your naysayers about proteases. It's no longer, you don't have clearly a negative control. So you start looking at long-term effects. For me, I tend to go in and say, let's do a year. If you have regions that you're feeding from different feed mills, let's take one feed mill and use this high doses and see if you see a generalized improvement in less mortality, less morbidity, better feed conversion ratios. That is not a scientific proof because you're comparing one region to another, but it gives you an idea that you're having less problems, and we start implementing it in other regions. So,
okay. Our time it's almost done, but I want to before we stop, I want to reach to you exactly what you were saying about, well, we have these conditions, let's stay for 1 year in one feed mill and look what's going on. But, and I know that people do it, but it's a lot of experience more than scientific, right? So for example, we have like a nutritionist that stay for many years in the same company, then at the end he was like more close to have more adjusted diet because he has the experience. But in those days, in the days that we live today, we have the artificial intelligence that could be put together with the statistics. And for example, we have a lot, we have NIRs, we have all the information about the formulation, we have all the performance data from many companies that have it in the cell phone today, you know? So I wonder why this company, in your vision, if you believe in artificial intelligence to put all this together and help us as company or help us as scientists to understand better and see it as a scientific way, because we have, Roselina, and I put myself in these shoes. Like as a scientist, we have always the visions in the past that we have like a picture. We take a picture from one trial, a picture for another trial, and we try to put together to make it a movie, as the cinema did it in the past. But in these days, we can do it more smooth because we have this real data that comes to us, our cell phone every time. So first, if you believe it, and if you believe it, why we as an industry, as a poultry, swine, or additive industry, we are taking so long to try to put together this technology, and as scientists as well, because when you say that we need to work, scientists, companies, everybody hand by hand and try to learn what's going on, this is not going to happen if you don't have the data together, and everybody wants to put the data behind the shoulder and say, I don't want to show it because, and at the end of the day, it's almost the same. So it doesn't mean many things. I know your data if I don't know where this comes from, right? But what I mean, it's first question, do you believe in artificial intelligence? You see it in the future? And if this is already happens in another industry, why we are taking so long? Because not to take longer because it's take longer, but it's because I don't see people talking about that in our area, like really putting it in they talk, but they don't put it in movement. Like I know that you are a consultant for many companies, but how many of them bring the data to you in the way they have, right?
So it varies. It's interesting because sometimes, and I don't spend too much time with these companies, because if you do not have an open book and you cannot work with what is real, what is happening, you can't help them. And I'll tell you that I'm getting into my later years, and I have very little time to waste. I have none. So when I feel I'm wasting my time, not because I know a lot, but I'm always seeking to work in collaboration. And collaboration means I open my book completely, my mind. I'm willing to listen and see everything you can show me. I'll put my 2 cents, you put your 2 cents, and hopefully we move forward. And I think today, I believe that in the future, we will be using artificial intelligence to make a lot of decisions that we are not making correctly today, because we are looking only at part of the information on one side. I'm not in the artificial intelligence world, but I will tell you that I work with companies that are trying to put together systems that allow them to put together information over time, both from the nutritional side as well as the health side, as well as the production, performance, and meat quality, putting everything together, environment. The challenge that I see in general is that artificial intelligence is a business. So everybody has the best artificial intelligence, and that ultimately, everybody has to make a living, Elizabeth. Everybody has something to sell, but it also curtails us in moving forward, I believe. But the other thing that happens is that the form of the data and the understanding of the variability or the error associated with that data is not there. So let's go to this calcium issue. In artificial intelligence, you get the formula, it's in there from the nutritional side. And I'm formulating, say, a withdrawal diet at 0.7 calcium. 3 weeks ago, I got some data, a withdrawal formula formulated at 0.7 calcium. When it was analyzed, it analyzed at 1.1. That is not in the artificial intelligence, because you do not have some people say they do. They can predict calcium in a final diet with near infrared. I continue to believe in the basic science behind analytics, and you cannot analyze inorganic calcium with a near infrared system. So you do not have an ability to put into this artificial intelligence what the animal actually saw, what did they eat. And so there are little things associated with where we are right now that I don't think we're giving enough importance to understanding the error associated with the numbers that are coming in. I think when we start putting that into our artificial intelligence system, we will be moving quicker towards the future, where the quality of the data coming in is better, because we have working with all of the parts of our production system to send us the data as we need it.
Yes, I think we have some work to do together, but we need to start working that. And yeah, I agree with you. When I was consultant as a professor for many times, I have the same situations like you. You start to work with the company, but at the end you don't know what you don't have any information. They don't show everything. So it's like you ask for a lawyer to defend you, to help you, but at the end you hide that you do something, and this was the situation. I think with many of the consultants. Last week I talked to Sergio, and he said the same, like we are asking, but if you don't say what they want to hear, sometimes it's not easy, right? But I challenge all the people in field and all the companies, the managers, to start to think about artificial intelligence, and as scientists to put together, like open a little bit for us to understand, because sometimes they say the scientist doesn't know field, but they don't allow us to know the field as we need to see the field. And I just start to work with Nikki these last days, and it's impressive the amount of the information that you have just for a very nice analysis. I will invite Nick to be here with me in another talk, because I think the analysis of the environment for you to do a trial is completely different. And I know this is very repetitive. People that I feel are very tired of, because every week I ask the same, but I will ask the same for you too. How about a barn or a house against another house to compare any kind of products, not just enzyme, any kind of products? How do you think about to have, oh, I want to test a product, so I put one barn against another barn? How do you feel about that as a scientist?
Yes, I think it's to put it mildly, I think it's a waste. The reality is that your biggest influencer is the barn itself and not the product. So a lot of people will say, okay, I'm going to try it in one house versus another house. And it does not work. And especially, I think if you've been out in the field, they should know, because you go out even to one farm, and I think I mentioned this to you before. You're doing trials in the field, you'll go to a farm where you have some houses on one product and other houses on the control diet that the company uses, and you'll go into a house and you say, this house, there's something wrong. They had a huge leak. It took them forever to fix it. It smells like a fermented brewery. You know that house isn't going to do well. So you have differences even within a farm between houses. We know from microbiota data that always amazes me that within a farm, different houses will have different microbiota. So we have to understand the limitations of our trial systems and not continue to waste our time with one house against another. If we're going to do a trial, I always say, let's do it right. Let's not waste the effort and time of people, because time is our most valuable commodity at the end of the day.
Thank you so much, Roselina. It was really nice to talk to you. It was nice. And I would like to always say that how much I admire you. You are one of the first research that start in the poultry science as a woman. For me, it was really an honor to interview you always, because when I start to walk in the poultry science, you are the woman that was always there and very brave and very structured. So congratulations for all your career. It's always for me an honor to be close to you. Thank you so much. And thank you for our audience. If you want to say something, it's open.
No, I thank you. Thank everybody who showed up. I hope we answered some things. You got some insight in how we think, because it's not always, this is the experimental design, this is this, but the philosophy we bring into things. And I know my email is out there. If there are questions, they can go in through the system, and I will try and answer whatever I can. I don't know everything, and that's why I'm still searching for answers. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a nice day there. People have a nice day at home. And next week we will have a new meeting, and we talk more about coccidiosis. Thank you so much, Roselina. Have a good day. Thank you all of you at home. Thank you. Bye-bye.